I thought hustle was survival. I used to believe that if I slowed down, everything would collapse. My job. My marriage. My place in America. Maybe even my worth as a human being. Have you ever felt that way? Like rest isn't neutral, it's dangerous. Like if you stop moving, the world will quietly decide you don't matter anymore. This video isn't about quitting work or escaping reality. It's about the moment I realized that chasing hustle nearly cost me my mind, my relationship, and the version of myself I moved to the United States to become. When I first arrived in the U.S., I didn't come chasing happiness. I came chasing survival disguised as ambition. I told myself a clean story: work hard now, rest later. That's the American way, right? Hustle culture wasn't just around me, it felt baked into the air. Everyone seemed busy. Everyone was exhausted. And everyone acted like that exhaustion was a badge of honor. So I adapted. I learned how to smile while tired. How to say I'm good when my chest felt tight for no clear reason. How to confuse productivity with purpose. Here's the thing nobody tells you when you move to America: the pressure isn't always loud. Sometimes it whispers. It says, you're lucky to be here. It says, other people would kill for this opportunity. It says, don't complain. Just work harder. And slowly, without realizing it, you start believing that rest is something you have to earn. Like oxygen with a price tag. I worked full days, sometimes nights, telling myself this was temporary. I said yes to overtime, yes to extra responsibilities, yes to being available even when my body was begging for silence. My phone was always nearby. My mind was never off. Even on weekends, my thoughts were clocked in. If I wasn't working, I was worrying about work. If I wasn't worrying, I felt guilty for not doing more. It was exhausting, but it also felt normal. That's the scary part. Psychologically, this makes sense. Studies in occupational health psychology show that chronic overwork activates the stress response system almost constantly. Cortisol stays high. The nervous system never fully resets. Over time, your brain starts to associate rest with danger, not safety. So when you finally sit still, anxiety shows up instead of relief. Your body thinks something is wrong. That was happening to me, even though I didn't have the language for it yet. At home, the cost was quiet but heavy. My marriage didn't explode. It slowly faded into background noise. Conversations became logistical. Who's picking up groceries? What time are you working tomorrow? Love didn't disappear, it just didn't have space to breathe. I told myself this was normal too. Temporary sacrifice. Long-term reward. That story again. But one night, after a long shift, I sat in my car and couldn't remember why I was doing any of it. Not in a dramatic way. Just a blank, hollow pause. My hands were on the steering wheel, my chest felt tight, and for a moment I wondered if this was what success was supposed to feel like. Because if it was, something was deeply wrong. Neuroscience offers an uncomfortable truth here. When the brain is under constant pressure, the prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for decision-making and emotional regulation, starts to lose efficiency. You don't think clearly. You don't feel joy deeply. You just operate. That's where I was living. Functioning, not feeling. Surviving, not choosing. And yet, the idea of slowing down terrified me more than the burnout itself. In America, especially as an immigrant or outsider, there's this unspoken fear: if you stop, you'll fall behind forever. Someone younger, faster, cheaper will replace you. So you keep running. Not toward something, but away from that fear. I didn't realize it then, but I had equated my worth with my output. If I wasn't producing, I felt invisible. If I rested, I felt lazy. That belief didn't come from nowhere. It was reinforced by performance reviews, social media, even casual conversations where the first question is always, "What do you do?" Not "How are you?" Here's the quiet irony: the harder I worked, the less present I became. With my partner. With myself. Even with the life I was supposedly building. Hustle promised me security, but it was slowly eroding my foundation. This section of my story isn't about blaming America or glorifying struggle. It's about honesty. About admitting that I mistook constant motion for progress. That I believed rest was weakness because no one taught me otherwise. And that understanding this, really understanding it, was the first crack in the wall I'd built around my nervous system. If you're watching this and feeling a strange recognition, let me say this gently: you're not broken. You're responding exactly how a human nervous system responds when it's under non-stop pressure. The problem isn't that you can't keep up. The problem is that you were never meant to. I didn't change my life overnight. I didn't quit my job. I didn't suddenly become calm and enlightened. But this was the moment I stopped lying to myself. The moment I admitted that hustle, for me, had become a survival mechanism, not a path to fulfillment. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. America looked perfect from outside. From the outside, America looked calm. Organized. Efficient. Blue skies and commercials. Smiling people jogging with coffee in their hands like life had figured itself out. I remember thinking, if I can just get there, breathe that air, live in that system, things will finally make sense. Have you ever believed that a place could fix what you feel inside? That geography could heal what exhaustion has carved into your mind? Living and working in the U.S., I learned quickly that the beauty is real, but so is the pressure. It's just quieter. More polished. Stress here doesn't scream. It schedules meetings. It sends polite emails. It says no rush and then rewards the person who never stops. From the outside, everything looks balanced. From the inside, many people are barely holding it together. Climate was the first subtle shock. I didn't expect weather to affect my mental health, but it did. Long winters that shrink daylight. Summers that burn your energy before noon. Research in environmental psychology shows that reduced sunlight can disrupt circadian rhythms and serotonin production, increasing fatigue and low mood. I didn't know the science yet. I just knew I felt heavier for no obvious reason. Like my body was constantly adjusting but never quite arriving. Work culture amplified that feeling. In meetings, people spoke about work-life balance while checking emails under the table. Vacations were taken, but never fully. Laptops came along just in case. The message was subtle but clear: you can rest, but don't disconnect. Your value lives in your availability. I absorbed that quickly. I became reachable. Reliable. Quietly exhausted. Socially, America felt friendly, but distant. People were kind, yet private. Polite, yet guarded. Conversations stayed light. Everyone was busy. Building deep connections took time I didn't feel allowed to have. Loneliness doesn't always look like isolation. Sometimes it looks like being surrounded by people who don't have the capacity to really see you. That kind of loneliness is harder to explain and easier to ignore. At home, this tension followed me. My partner and I were adapting to the same country in different ways. Different expectations. Different stress thresholds. I processed emotions by withdrawing. They processed by wanting to talk. Neither was wrong. But without space, without rest, misunderstandings multiplied. We weren't fighting, we were missing each other. That's often more dangerous. There's a concept in cross-cultural psychology called adjustment fatigue. It happens when your brain spends too much energy adapting to new norms, language cues, and unspoken rules. You're constantly scanning, is this okay to say? Did I misunderstand that tone? Am I doing enough? That background processing drains mental resources. Add hustle culture on top of that, and burnout becomes almost inevitable. Still, I told myself to be grateful. That word became a shield. Grateful people don't complain. Grateful people push through. Grateful people don't admit they're struggling in a country full of opportunity. So I smiled. I posted photos. I said I was fine. And slowly, I disconnected from my own signals. The irony is that America does offer freedom. Real freedom. But it also places the responsibility for well-being almost entirely on the individual. If you're tired, manage your time better. If you're anxious, download an app. If you're overwhelmed, try yoga after work. The system keeps moving. You're expected to adapt or fall behind. Understanding that helped me stop blaming myself, but it didn't come right away. One evening, after a long day that wasn't even particularly bad, I realized something unsettling. I wasn't unhappy because something was wrong. I was unhappy because I never stopped long enough to ask how I was doing. That question felt foreign. Almost inappropriate. Like asking a machine how it feels while it's running. Neuroscience explains why this happens. When you're constantly task-focused, the brain's default mode network, the system responsible for self-reflection and emotional processing, gets suppressed. You lose access to your inner narrative. You become efficient, but disconnected. That's exactly how America felt to me at that stage, efficient, impressive, and emotionally distant. This isn't a criticism of the country. It's an observation of the environment. A reminder that no place, no matter how developed, can replace self-awareness. I had projected my hope onto a location instead of building it internally. And that realization hurt, but it was necessary. If you're watching this from the outside, dreaming of a different life somewhere else, hear this gently. The scenery might change. But your nervous system comes with you. If rest feels unsafe now, it will feel unsafe there too, unless you learn otherwise. America didn't break me. It revealed what I had been avoiding. The perfection I imagined was never real. And understanding that was the first step towards seeing the country, and myself, more clearly. When my body started saying no. Have you ever noticed how your body never argues with you, it just stops cooperating? That's how it began for me in the United States. No dramatic collapse. No hospital bed. Just a quiet rebellion. I was still showing up to work, still answering emails, still living the life I thought I had chosen. But my body had started voting against me, and it was winning. At first, I treated the signals like background noise. Fatigue that didn't disappear after sleep. A constant tightness in my shoulders, like I was bracing for impact even while making coffee. My breath felt shallow, especially in the mornings, as if my lungs were unsure whether the day was safe. I blamed the climate. The long winters. The dry air. The time zones that still lived inside my nervous system. America is big, and it's easy to blame geography instead of psychology. The truth was less convenient. My body wasn't reacting to weather. It was reacting to years of unbroken pressure. In the U.S., I had learned to override discomfort quickly. Headache? Coffee. Exhaustion? Push through. Emotional heaviness? Distract. That strategy works short-term. Neuroscience confirms it. The brain can suppress signals when survival feels urgent. But suppression isn't resolution. It's debt. What surprised me most was how normal everything still looked. I wasn't failing at work. I wasn't behind on bills. From the outside, my life seemed stable. That's why I ignored myself for so long. Burnout doesn't always announce itself with chaos. Sometimes it arrives dressed as competence. You're functioning, but only just enough to avoid questions. Climate amplified this in ways I didn't expect. Shorter daylight hours disrupted my sleep-wake cycle. Studies show that limited sunlight can lower serotonin and increase fatigue, especially in people already under stress. I didn't know the term seasonal affective response yet. I just knew mornings felt heavier than they should. Getting out of bed felt like lifting a decision, not a body. At work, I stayed sharp on the surface. Inside, my concentration fractured. I reread the same sentence multiple times. Simple decisions felt expensive. That's cognitive load, the brain's way of saying it's carrying too much at once. Chronic stress reduces working memory and slows processing speed. Again, I didn't have the language. I just thought I was getting worse at life. At home, my marriage absorbed the overflow. I wasn't angry. I was absent. And absence is harder to fight than conflict. Conversations shortened. Eye contact faded. We still cared, but caring without energy feels hollow. My partner would ask how my day was, and I'd answer with facts instead of feelings. Not because I didn't trust them, but because I couldn't access myself. There's a psychological concept called alexithymia, difficulty identifying and describing emotions. It often increases under prolonged stress. I wasn't emotionally unavailable by choice. My nervous system was overloaded. When survival mode is active, emotional nuance gets deprioritized. The brain focuses on getting through, not connecting. That doesn't make you cold. It makes you human. The moment that scared me most happened on an ordinary afternoon. I was sitting at my desk when my heart suddenly raced. No trigger. No bad news. Just a wave of panic that didn't ask permission. My hands trembled. My thoughts scattered. It lasted maybe 5 minutes, but it changed everything. My body had crossed from whispering to interrupting. Later, I learned what was happening. Chronic stress sensitizes the amygdala, the brain's alarm system. When it's overstimulated for too long, it stops waiting for real threats. It fires preemptively. That's not weakness. That's protection gone unchecked. Understanding this didn't come immediately. In that moment, all I felt was fear fear that I was losing control in a country that rewards control above all else. I took a day off. Then felt guilty the entire time. Rest didn't feel like recovery. It felt like failure. That reaction alone told me how deeply hustle had rewired my thinking. In the U.S., rest often has to justify itself. You don't just rest, you recharge to be more productive. Even self-care is framed as efficiency. My body wasn't interested in efficiency anymore. It wanted safety. In my marriage, this became unavoidable. Two exhausted nervous systems can't co-regulate. We misread each other constantly. Silence felt personal. Slowness felt like rejection. Neither of us was wrong, we were depleted. Research on relationship stress shows that burnout reduces empathy and increases misinterpretation. Love doesn't disappear. Access to it does. The scientific term for what I was experiencing is allostatic load, the cumulative wear and tear on the body from chronic stress. High allostatic load affects immunity, mood, sleep, and even cardiovascular health. I wasn't just tired. I was overloaded. And the body always collects its balance. The shift didn't happen because I suddenly became wise. It happened because I stopped arguing with my symptoms. I stopped asking, what's wrong with me, and started asking, what is my body responding to? That question changed everything. It turned shame into curiosity. Weakness into information. If you're listening and recognizing your own story, pause here. Notice your breath. Your jaw. Your shoulders. The body doesn't lie, it negotiates until it can't. Mine wasn't betraying me. It was protecting me from a pace I had mistaken for progress. That understanding didn't fix my life overnight. But it gave me something I hadn't had in a long time. Permission. Culture shock inside my marriage. No one warns you that culture shock doesn't stop at the airport. It follows you home. It sits at your dinner table. It sleeps next to you. I thought moving to the United States would challenge my language, my career, maybe my confidence. I didn't expect it to quietly rewrite the rules of my marriage. Have you ever argued with someone you love and felt like you were speaking the same language, but living in completely different worlds? In America, individuality is oxygen. Independence is celebrated early, loudly, and often. You're taught to stand on your own feet, protect your boundaries, prioritize personal goals. None of that is wrong. But when those values collide with a relationship built on interdependence, compromise, and shared emotional labor, friction is inevitable. I didn't see it at first. I felt it. At work, directness was rewarded. Speak up. Advocate for yourself. Don't take things personally. At home, that same directness sounded cold. Detached. Efficient in all the wrong ways. I started communicating like a professional even in intimate moments. Clear. Logical. Emotionally distant. I told myself I was being mature. My partner felt I was disappearing. Cultural psychology explains this better than I ever could back then. High individualism cultures, like the U.S., emphasize autonomy and self-expression. More collective cultures emphasize harmony and emotional attunement. When couples adapt to a new cultural environment at different speeds, or in different directions, misunderstandings multiply. We weren't fighting about chores or schedules. We were fighting about meaning. Small moments became confusing. If I needed space, I thought I was being responsible. If my partner needed closeness, I saw it as pressure. Neither of us was wrong. We were operating under different emotional rulebooks, both shaped by stress, work culture, and survival mode. Love didn't vanish. Translation did. The pace of life in America didn't help. Everything moved fast. Workdays were long. Commutes drained whatever energy was left. By the time we sat together, our nervous systems were already overloaded. Neuroscience shows that connection requires regulation. When both people are stressed, the brain prioritizes protection over bonding. That's when misinterpretation thrives. I remember one night clearly. We were sitting in the same room, doing different things, not speaking. The silence felt heavy. Not peaceful. Heavy. I thought I was giving space. They thought I was pulling away. That gap, between intention and impact, is where resentment quietly grows. Add climate to the mix, and things deepen. Long winters meant fewer social outlets, less movement, less light. Seasonal changes affect mood and emotional availability. Studies link reduced sunlight to increased irritability and emotional withdrawal. Again, we didn't know the science. We just felt less patient, less warm, less ourselves. In America, there's also an unspoken expectation that couples should handle it. Seek therapy if needed, sure, but don't lean too much on others. Emotional struggles are often privatized. I internalized that. I thought needing support meant failing at adulthood. So instead of talking, I minimized. Instead of sharing fear, I offered solutions. That's not intimacy. That's management. My partner began to feel alone while being married. I began to feel misunderstood while trying my best. Both experiences can exist at once. Relationship research calls this emotional misalignment, when two people are bonded but no longer synchronized. It's incredibly common during major life transitions, especially immigration. The hardest part was admitting that hustle culture had followed me home. I wasn't just overworking at my job. I was overworking my role as a partner. Fixing. Optimizing. Moving forward without slowing down enough to feel. I treated our relationship like a project instead of a living system. One evening, after a tense but quiet day, my partner said something that landed harder than any argument. I don't need you to solve this. I need you to be here. That sentence cracked something open. I realized I had confused strength with emotional distance. I thought staying composed meant staying loving. In reality, I had been unavailable. Attachment theory explains this shift well. Under prolonged stress, people often lean toward avoidant coping, pulling inward to preserve energy. It's not a choice. It's a response. My nervous system was conserving resources. Unfortunately, intimacy requires presence, not conservation. You can't outsource connection to later. Understanding this didn't magically fix our marriage. But it reframed the problem. We weren't incompatible. We were exhausted and culturally disoriented. That matters. It replaces blame with context. Shame with curiosity. If you're living in the U.S. and feeling distance in your relationship, consider this gently. It might not be about love. It might be about load. Emotional load. Cultural load. Nervous system load. When those pile up, even strong relationships feel fragile. I stopped asking, why are we like this now? and started asking, what is this environment asking of us? That question softened everything. It allowed space for compassion, for both of us. Culture shock didn't ruin my marriage. Ignoring it almost did. And understanding that was the first moment I believed healing was possible, not by working harder at love, but by slowing down enough to feel it again. Love can't compete with burnout. There's a quiet lie we tell ourselves when life gets hard, that love will automatically survive anything. That if two people care enough, exhaustion doesn't matter. Stress doesn't matter. Context doesn't matter. I believed that lie when I was living and working in the United States. I thought love was strong enough to outrun burnout. I was wrong. Love isn't weak, but it is human. And humans have limits. Burnout doesn't show up holding a sign that says relationship danger. It arrives disguised as practicality, as efficiency, as being too tired to talk tonight, too busy to notice the change in someone's voice, too drained to ask the second question after "How was your day?" You still love each other. You just don't have the energy to access that love. In America, the pace makes this easier to miss. Long workdays. Long commutes. Screens everywhere. Even rest is scheduled. When I came home, my body wasn't arriving with me. My nervous system was still at work, still alert, still braced. My partner would be there physically, but emotionally, we were both running on empty. Two phones on the table. Two tired minds pretending everything was fine. What hurt most was how subtle the shift was. We didn't stop caring. We stopped connecting. Conversations turned transactional. Did you pay the bill? What time is your meeting? Who's cooking? Love became logistics. Not because we wanted it to, but because burnout strips relationships down to what's essential for survival, not intimacy. Psychology has a term for this: emotional depletion. When mental and emotional resources are consumed by stress, there's little left for empathy, curiosity, or playfulness. Studies show that chronic stress reduces oxytocin sensitivity, the hormone linked to bonding and trust. That means even when loving moments are available, the body doesn't register them the same way. You're not cold. You're depleted. In my case, work stress bled into everything. I was always thinking ahead. Always optimizing. Even during conversations, part of my mind was elsewhere. My partner noticed. They felt unseen. I felt pressured. That's how burnout turns love into a quiet competition, whose needs are more urgent when neither person has enough to give. I remember a small moment that still stings. We finally had an evening with no plans. No work emergencies. No deadlines. My partner wanted to talk, really talk. I wanted silence. Not because I didn't care, but because my system was overloaded. When I asked for space, it sounded like rejection. When they asked for closeness, it felt like demand. Same situation. Two exhausted interpretations. Relationship science explains this well. When stress is high, the brain shifts into self-preservation mode. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for perspective-taking, goes offline faster. You become less flexible. Less generous in interpretation. Burnout narrows emotional bandwidth. Love needs bandwidth. Without it, even good intentions collide. America's work culture doesn't help. There's an unspoken expectation that personal life should adapt around work, not the other way around. Hustle is praised. Endurance is admired. Emotional availability is optional. I absorbed that mindset without realizing it. I treated my relationship like something that should understand why I was absent. That's not fair, but it's common. Climate played a role too. Long winters meant fewer spontaneous moments. Less sunlight. Less energy. Seasonal research shows increased irritability and withdrawal during darker months, especially under stress. We weren't fighting, we were hibernating emotionally. And hibernation doesn't nurture intimacy. The most dangerous part was how reasonable everything sounded in my head. This is just a phase. Things will get better when work slows down. We're building something for the future. Burnout loves future promises. It convinces you to sacrifice the present endlessly. Meanwhile, relationships only exist in the present. At some point, my partner said something quietly devastating. I feel like I'm sharing space with your exhaustion, not with you. That sentence hurt because it was true. I hadn't chosen work over love consciously. I had chosen survival over presence. And survival doesn't leave much room for tenderness. Attachment theory offers insight here. Under prolonged stress, people often default to protective strategies. Some withdraw. Some pursue reassurance. Neither is wrong. Both are attempts to feel safe. The problem is when those strategies clash. One person pulls back to recover. The other reaches out to reconnect. Without understanding, both feel rejected. This is where the idea of choosing mental health over hustle became personal. I realized love couldn't compete with burnout, not because love was insufficient, but because burnout is corrosive. It eats away at attention, patience, and emotional safety. Asking a relationship to survive that without adjustment is unrealistic. The shift began when I stopped asking my partner to understand my exhaustion and started understanding it myself. When I acknowledged that my stress wasn't neutral, it was shaping how I showed up. When I admitted that rest wasn't indulgent, it was relational responsibility. If you're watching this and wondering why your relationship feels distant even though the love is still there, consider this gently. It might not be about effort. It might be about energy. Burnout doesn't mean you love less. It means you have less access to that love. Love doesn't need grand gestures. It needs regulated nervous systems. Shared pauses. Enough rest to listen without defending. I didn't know that at first. I was trying to save my relationship by pushing harder. What actually helped was slowing down. Because love can't compete with burnout, but it can return when burnout is addressed. Rest felt like a dangerous choice. Rest terrified me more than exhaustion ever did. That sounds dramatic, but if you've lived and worked in the United States long enough, you might understand. In a culture where movement equals value, stopping feels suspicious. Like you're doing something wrong. Like you're about to be exposed. Have you ever tried to rest and felt your anxiety spike instead of calm down? That was my reality. Rest didn't feel safe. It felt like risk. I remember the first time I intentionally slowed down. Not because I was sick. Not because I had no choice. But because I decided to. I left work on time. I didn't open my laptop at night. I sat on the couch doing nothing productive. And my body reacted as if I had stepped into danger. My chest tightened. My thoughts raced. Guilt showed up immediately. loud, persistent. You should be doing something. You're falling behind. This is how people fail. That reaction wasn't random. Neuroscience explains it clearly. When your nervous system has been conditioned by chronic hustle, stress becomes familiar. Familiar feels safe, even when it hurts. Rest, on the other hand, feels unfamiliar. The brain interprets unfamiliar as threat. So when you stop, your system panics, not because rest is bad, but because it doesn't recognize it as safe yet. In America, rest often has to justify itself. You don't rest to feel. You rest to recover so you can produce more. Even self-care is framed as a productivity tool. Take a break so you can come back stronger. I had absorbed that logic completely. So when I rested without an output goal, it felt pointless. Wasteful. Almost irresponsible. This mindset followed me into my marriage. When my partner suggested slowing down, spending more time together without an agenda, I resisted. Not outwardly. Internally. My mind kept calculating opportunity cost. What else could we be doing? What was I neglecting? I thought I was being practical. In reality, I was afraid of stillness. Psychology calls this rest-related guilt, and it's common in high-pressure environments. Studies show that people in hustle-driven cultures experience increased anxiety during unstructured time. The brain, trained to equate worth with activity, struggles when activity stops. That doesn't mean you're broken. It means you've been trained well, for the wrong outcome. Climate added another layer. In colder seasons, rest feels heavier. Days are shorter. Energy dips naturally. Instead of respecting that rhythm, I fought it. I drank more coffee. Pushed harder. Ignored signals. In doing so, I wasn't just resisting rest, I was resisting my biology. Circadian rhythm research shows that seasonal changes affect energy, mood, and cognitive function. Rest isn't optional during these shifts. It's adaptive. At work, choosing rest felt like career sabotage. I worried about being seen as less committed. Less hungry. In the U.S., commitment is often measured by availability, not effectiveness. I feared that if I wasn't always on, I'd be replaced. That fear kept my nervous system in a constant low-grade alarm. Even when nothing was wrong, my body stayed ready for impact. The irony is that my performance didn't improve with overwork. It dulled. My creativity dropped. My patience thinned. Cognitive science confirms this. Prolonged stress impairs problem-solving and decision-making. Rest isn't the opposite of productivity. It's a requirement for it. But knowing that intellectually didn't immediately change how rest felt emotionally. One evening, after a long week, my partner and I sat quietly together. No phones. No plans. Just silence. My instinct was to fill it. Talk. Do something. Anything. Silence felt exposed. But we stayed. And slowly, something softened. My breathing slowed. My shoulders dropped. For the first time in a while, my body didn't feel like it had to perform. That moment taught me something important. Rest isn't passive. It's active relearning. You're teaching your nervous system that stillness won't kill you. That connection doesn't require effort. That worth doesn't disappear when output pauses. This relearning takes time. And discomfort. Because you're undoing years of conditioning. Attachment theory offers insight here too. When rest is unsafe, people often overfunction. They stay busy to avoid vulnerability. Stillness invites feeling. Feeling invites uncertainty. In my case, rest threatened to surface emotions I had been suppressing for years. Grief. Fear. Doubt. Hustle had been protecting me from those. Rest removed the armor. Understanding this reframed everything. I stopped asking why rest felt so hard and started asking what it was protecting me from. That question shifted rest from laziness to courage. From weakness to exposure. Choosing rest wasn't giving up. It was facing what hustle had been helping me avoid. In my marriage, this shift mattered. When I rested, truly rested, I became more present. Less reactive. More available. Not because I tried harder, but because my system wasn't in constant defense. Research shows that regulated nervous systems co-regulate. When one person slows down, it invites the other to do the same. Rest became relational, not selfish. If you're watching this and rest feels uncomfortable, even frightening, know this, that reaction is learned. And anything learned can be unlearned. Slowly. Gently. With patience. Rest felt like a dangerous choice because hustle had convinced me it was. Understanding changed that. I didn't become weaker when I rested. I became reachable. The science behind my exhaustion. Have you ever felt tired in a way that sleep doesn't touch? Not sleepy, heavy. Like your body is carrying a backpack you never agreed to wear. That was me in America. 8 hours of sleep didn't help. Weekends didn't help. Vacations barely made a dent. I kept asking myself the wrong question, why can't I recover? The better question was, what am I recovering from? For a long time, I thought exhaustion meant weakness or poor discipline. If I were stronger, more organized, more motivated, I'd feel better. That belief fit perfectly into hustle culture. But science tells a very different story. What I was experiencing wasn't laziness. It was a nervous system pushed beyond its design limits. Let's talk about stress, not the dramatic kind, but the constant, low-level pressure of living and working in the U.S. deadlines. Bills. Immigration concerns. Performance expectations. Cultural adjustment. Weather changes. Each one alone is manageable. Together, they create chronic stress. And chronic stress changes the brain. When stress becomes constant, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the HPA axis, stays activated. That system is meant for short bursts of danger, not years of non-stop pressure. Cortisol, the stress hormone, stays elevated. At first, it helps you focus. Over time, it exhausts you. High cortisol disrupts sleep, impairs memory, and reduces emotional regulation. You're alert but depleted. Awake but not restored. This explained so much. Why my mind felt foggy. Why simple decisions drained me. Why small problems felt overwhelming. My brain wasn't failing. It was protecting me by conserving energy. Cognitive neuroscience shows that under prolonged stress, the brain prioritizes survival functions over creativity, empathy, and long-term planning. You don't stop caring, you lose access. Then there's the autonomic nervous system. When you live in hustle mode, the sympathetic branch, the go system, dominates. Heart rate stays elevated. Muscles stay tense. Digestion slows. The parasympathetic rest and digest system barely gets a turn. That imbalance creates what researchers call nervous system dysregulation. You feel wired and tired at the same time. Sound familiar? Climate played a role here too. Seasonal changes affect circadian rhythms, which regulate hormones like melatonin and cortisol. In parts of the U.S., limited daylight during winter disrupts these rhythms, increasing fatigue and low mood. Add artificial light, screen exposure, and irregular schedules, and your internal clock never fully syncs. The body wants rest. The environment demands output. Emotionally, exhaustion narrowed my world. The brain under stress reduces range. You become less tolerant of uncertainty. Less flexible. Less patient. Relationship researchers call this stress spillover. Work stress doesn't stay at work. It follows you home, shaping how you listen, respond, and interpret. I wasn't emotionally distant by choice. My system was overloaded. There's also something called decision fatigue. Every decision, big or small, costs mental energy. Living in a new country multiplies decisions. Language nuances. Social norms. Workplace expectations. Even grocery shopping takes more processing. Over time, the brain's decision-making capacity depletes. You're not indecisive. You're saturated. Understanding this was a relief. It shifted my narrative from self-criticism to self-awareness. I wasn't broken. I was biologically overwhelmed. And biology responds better to understanding than to shame. One concept that changed everything for me was allostasis, the body's process of maintaining stability through change. Stress isn't the enemy. Adaptation is normal. The problem is allostatic overload, when adaptation becomes constant without recovery. That's when systems wear down. Immune function drops. Mood disorders increase. Chronic fatigue sets in. My exhaustion wasn't random. It was patterned. This science also reframed my marriage struggles. When two people are both dysregulated, communication suffers. The brain's threat system misreads tone. Neutral comments sound critical. Silence feels dangerous. It's not about love. It's about bandwidth. Regulated nervous systems create safety. Dysregulated ones create misunderstanding. Here's the hopeful part. The nervous system is plastic. It learns, and it can relearn. Regulation isn't about doing less forever. It's about creating enough safety for the parasympathetic system to re-engage. Slow breathing. Consistent sleep. Predictable routines. Gentle movement. Emotional validation. These aren't luxuries. They're interventions. I started small. Not with productivity hacks, but with physiology. Going outside in the morning to get natural light. Reducing caffeine after noon. Taking walks without podcasts. Practicing slower breathing when anxiety spiked. Science supports all of this. These actions signal safety to the nervous system. Safety is the prerequisite for healing. Understanding didn't instantly energize me. But it removed the panic around exhaustion. I stopped fighting my body and started cooperating with it. That changed everything. When you understand the system, you stop blaming the symptoms. If you're exhausted in a way rest doesn't fix, consider this: maybe you're not tired because you're doing too little. Maybe you're tired because you've been doing too much for too long without feeling safe enough to stop. Understanding heals, not because it fixes you, but because it tells you the truth. And the truth gave me back something I thought I had lost. Hope. Understanding changed everything. The shift didn't come with fireworks or a dramatic decision. It came quietly, like realizing the room was always this loud, you just stopped noticing. Understanding arrived not as motivation, but as relief. For the first time since living and working in the United States, I stopped fighting myself. And strangely enough, that's when things finally began to change. Before that moment, my inner dialogue was harsh and relentless. If I felt tired, I blamed my discipline. If I felt distant, I blamed my character. If my marriage felt heavy, I assumed something was wrong with us. Understanding dismantled that entire narrative. It showed me that my reactions weren't moral failures. They were biological responses to prolonged pressure. That single realization softened everything. Psychology calls this cognitive reappraisal, the ability to reinterpret experiences in a way that reduces emotional distress. Brain imaging studies show that when people accurately label and understand their emotional states, activity in the amygdala decreases. In simple language, when you understand what's happening inside you, your nervous system stops sounding the alarm. Confusion keeps you tense. Understanding gives you room to breathe. This mattered deeply in my marriage. Previously, when my partner said I felt distant, my body reacted defensively before my mind could respond. I explained. I justified. I minimized. Understanding changed that reflex. I began to hear their words as information, not accusation. That shift turned arguments into conversations. Not because we agreed more, but because we felt safer disagreeing. Living in America, I also began to understand the environment itself. I stopped personalizing systemic pressure. The U.S. rewards speed, productivity, and independence. That doesn't make it cruel, it makes it efficient. But efficiency isn't the same as human sustainability. Once I separated the system from my self-worth, the constant pressure to keep up loosened its grip. I wasn't failing at America. I was adapting to it. Understanding rewired my relationship with rest. Rest stopped being a reward for exhaustion and became a requirement for clarity. Neuroscience shows that the brain consolidates memory, regulates emotion, and integrates learning during rest states. When rest is removed, emotional reactivity increases and perspective narrows. That explained why everything felt overwhelming before. My brain hadn't had time to process anything. I also changed how I spoke to myself. Instead of saying, I shouldn't feel this way, I started asking, what is my nervous system responding to? That question replaced shame with curiosity. Shame activates threat responses. Curiosity invites regulation. Regulation is where healing lives. In my marriage, understanding became a shared tool. We stopped assigning motives and started naming states. I'm overstimulated. I'm running low on bandwidth. Research in emotionally focused therapy shows that naming internal experiences increases emotional attunement and reduces conflict. We weren't fixing each other. We were contextualizing each other. That alone lowered tension. Understanding also softened my relationship with my past self. I used to judge my earlier hustle harshly. Why did I push so hard? Why didn't I stop sooner? Understanding answered that gently. I pushed because I didn't feel safe enough to rest. I kept going because survival demanded it. That realization turned regret into compassion. And compassion is far more effective than criticism when it comes to change. This didn't make life easy. It made it honest. I stopped chasing an ideal version of myself who could endure anything without consequence. I started respecting the version of myself who needed care. That respect changed how I showed up at work, more focused, less frantic. It changed how I showed up at home, more present, less defensive. There's also a neurological reason understanding feels so stabilizing. The brain craves predictability. When symptoms feel random, anxiety rises. When patterns emerge, even difficult ones, anxiety decreases. Understanding gives the brain a map. And with a map, it no longer has to panic its way through the terrain. I noticed this most during moments of tension. When my partner seemed withdrawn, my old response would spiral into assumptions. Now, I paused. I checked context, stress levels, fatigue, timing. That pause created space between trigger and reaction. That space became freedom. Freedom to respond instead of react. For anyone caught between hustle and health, this matters deeply. Motivation pushes harder. Understanding guides wiser. One drains you. The other supports you. In a culture obsessed with overcoming, understanding is quietly revolutionary. In the United States, success is often framed as endurance. Understanding reframed it as alignment. Aligning effort with capacity. Ambition with biology. Goals with values. That alignment didn't make me less driven. It made my drive sustainable. Understanding healed my marriage not by removing conflict, but by making it safer to navigate. Understanding healed my relationship with work not by eliminating stress, but by setting humane boundaries. Understanding healed me not by changing who I was, but by explaining why I was the way I was. Once that clicked, rest stopped feeling like weakness. It felt like intelligence. And intelligence doesn't rush, it integrates. Understanding didn't solve everything. It made everything solvable. Small pauses saved my marriage. The biggest changes didn't arrive as dramatic conversations or perfectly planned weekends. They arrived as pauses. Small, almost invisible interruptions in the speed of our lives. At first, they felt insignificant. Later, I realized they were quietly saving my marriage. Not by fixing everything at once, but by giving us just enough space to breathe again. In the United States, life rewards momentum. When something feels off, the instinct is to do more, talk more, plan more. I used to think saving a relationship required effort at full volume. Deep talks. Long explanations. Emotional breakthroughs. What I didn't understand was that connection doesn't begin with intensity. It begins with safety. And safety is built in moments of pause. The first pause was physical. I stopped bringing work home every night. Not in a dramatic, career-risking way. Just small boundaries. Laptop closed after a certain hour. Phone left in another room during dinner. Neuroscience supports this more than most people realize. Continuous task switching keeps the brain in a state of alert. Removing work cues allows the nervous system to downshift. That downshift made me more available without trying. At first, the silence was awkward. We weren't used to being together without distraction. When stress dominates a relationship, stillness can feel uncomfortable. The brain expects stimulation. But we stayed with it. 10 minutes at first. Then longer. Those quiet moments became signals of safety. Research shows that shared calm experiences increase emotional attunement more effectively than problem-solving conversations. Another pause was emotional. I stopped responding immediately when tension appeared. Not ignoring. Pausing. Instead of defending myself, I asked what was underneath. Instead of explaining my exhaustion, I named it. Emotional regulation research shows that naming internal states reduces physiological arousal. When I said, "I'm overstimulated," instead of "you're asking too much," the entire tone shifted. These pauses changed how conflict unfolded. Arguments became shorter. Not because issues disappeared, but because escalation slowed. When the nervous system isn't flooded, perspective returns. That's not theory. That's biology. Stress hormones narrow attention. Calm widens it. The pause gave us access to empathy again. Climate played a role here too. During darker months, energy naturally dips. Instead of fighting that rhythm, we leaned into it. More evenings at home. Less forced socializing. Seasonal affective research shows that respecting natural energy fluctuations reduces irritability and emotional withdrawal. These adjustments weren't glamorous. They were grounding. One of the most powerful pauses was listening without fixing. I had learned, especially in American work culture, that problems are meant to be solved quickly. Efficiency is praised. In my marriage, that habit was damaging. My partner didn't need solutions. They needed presence. So I paused my impulse to optimize. I listened. That alone shifted the emotional dynamic. Attachment science explains why this mattered. Secure attachment forms when someone feels seen without being corrected. Pausing advice communicates acceptance. Acceptance lowers defensiveness. Lower defensiveness opens connection. The pause wasn't passive. It was deeply active. We also introduced micro-rituals. Nothing elaborate. Morning coffee together before screens. A short walk after dinner. These predictable pauses created anchors in our day. Neuroscience shows that predictable, shared routines increase feelings of safety and belonging. In a fast-moving environment like the U.S., these anchors mattered more than grand gestures. There were setbacks. Some days, stress won. Old patterns returned. But the pauses gave us a way back. They created recovery points. Instead of spiraling for days, we recalibrated within hours. That alone changed the emotional climate of our relationship. The most surprising shift was internal. As I paused more, my partner didn't have to chase connection. The imbalance softened. Pursuit slowed. Withdrawal lessened. Relationship researchers describe this as breaking the pursue-withdraw cycle. One regulated nervous system can influence another. My pauses invited theirs. These small changes also reshaped how I saw success. I stopped measuring relationship health by intensity and started measuring it by ease. How quickly we returned to calm. How safe silence felt. How natural laughter became again. Those metrics felt more honest. In American culture, improvement is often loud, visible, measurable. What saved my marriage was quiet, subtle, almost boring, but sustainable. The pauses didn't demand more energy. They restored it. If your relationship feels strained under the weight of work, stress, or constant motion, consider this gently. You might not need a breakthrough. You might need a break. Not from each other, but from the pace that keeps you disconnected. The pauses didn't fix us because we were broken. They worked because we were tired. And tired systems don't need pressure. They need permission to slow down. Those small pauses became our turning point. Not because they changed who we were, but because they reminded us of who we still were beneath the exhaustion. And sometimes, that's enough to bring love back within reach. Rest redefined my version of success. Success used to feel loud in my head. Not confident loud, but anxious loud. A constant internal commentary measuring hours worked, emails answered, milestones reached. Living and working in the United States amplified that noise. Hustle wasn't just encouraged, it was normalized as proof of worth. Rest, on the other hand, felt suspicious. Like a weakness disguised as self-care. It took a long time, and a lot of quiet unraveling, for me to understand that rest wasn't the opposite of success. It was the foundation of it. The shift didn't happen after a breakdown or a dramatic failure. It happened slowly, through fatigue that wouldn't go away. No matter how much I achieved, satisfaction felt temporary. The body remembers what the mind tries to override. Chronic stress research shows that prolonged overwork dulls dopamine response, making accomplishments feel emptier over time. I was chasing goals that no longer fed me, yet I kept running because stopping felt dangerous. Rest first entered my life not as a choice, but as a necessity. Sleep became non-negotiable. Not the glamorous 5 a.m. club kind of discipline, but the unremarkable act of going to bed earlier. The science is clear. Sleep regulates emotional processing, memory consolidation, and stress resilience. As my sleep improved, my emotional reactivity decreased. I became less defensive, less irritable, more present. That alone changed how I showed up at work and at home. What surprised me was how rest affected clarity. With fewer mental alarms ringing, I started questioning old definitions of success. Was productivity really about output, or about sustainability? Organizational psychology suggests that long-term performance depends more on recovery cycles than constant exertion. Rest wasn't slowing me down. It was sharpening me. In American culture, rest is often framed as a reward earned after exhaustion. I flipped that logic. Rest became the prerequisite. I scheduled breaks the way I once scheduled meetings. Short walks. Quiet mornings. Even moments of doing nothing without filling them with content. At first, guilt surfaced. That guilt wasn't personal, it was cultural conditioning. Studies on work identity show that when self-worth is tied to productivity, rest triggers shame. Recognizing that helped me let it pass. This redefinition of success affected my marriage deeply. When rest entered my life, presence followed. I listened better. I reacted less. Emotional availability isn't about effort, it's about capacity. Rest expanded that capacity. My partner didn't need a more ambitious version of me. They needed a regulated one. We started celebrating different wins. Not promotions or pay raises, but evenings without tension. Conversations that didn't feel rushed. Shared laughter that arrived naturally. These moments reinforced something powerful. Success felt better when it was shared calmly, not chased aggressively. There was also a shift in how I handled failure. Rest gave me perspective. Instead of catastrophizing setbacks, I processed them. Neuroscience explains this through prefrontal cortex recovery. When the brain isn't exhausted, it can contextualize challenges instead of reacting emotionally. That resilience changed my relationship with work pressure. Climate and environment played a role too. In quieter seasons, rest came more easily. Instead of resisting that slowdown, I aligned with it. Seasonal rhythms aren't laziness, they're biological. Ignoring them increases burnout risk. Honoring them improved my mood and energy consistency. One of the hardest lessons was learning that rest doesn't need justification. I didn't have to earn it by suffering first. That belief alone lifted a heavy internal burden. Rest became an act of self-respect, not self-indulgence. As my definition of success softened, my ambition didn't disappear. It matured. Goals became more intentional. I chose projects that aligned with my values instead of chasing validation. Rest created space for discernment. Without it, everything feels urgent. With it, priorities emerge naturally. Understanding healed something deeper too. I stopped viewing myself as a machine to be optimized and started seeing myself as a system to be cared for. Systems thrive on balance, not constant output. This perspective reduced self-criticism and increased compassion for myself and others. In a culture that glorifies grind, choosing rest felt rebellious at first. But over time, it felt grounded. The quieter my life became, the clearer my direction grew. Success stopped shouting. It started whispering. Rest didn't make me less driven. It made me more human. And in that humanity, I found a version of success that didn't cost me my health, my marriage, or my peace. That redefinition changed everything, not overnight, but permanently. Understanding was the turning point. Understanding didn't arrive as insight. It arrived as relief. A quiet release in my chest when I stopped demanding answers from myself and started allowing explanations. Living and working in the United States had taught me to diagnose problems quickly and fix them faster. But healing didn't follow that script. Healing asked for something slower. Something gentler. It asked for understanding before improvement. For a long time, I treated exhaustion like a personal failure. If I felt overwhelmed, I assumed I lacked discipline. If my marriage felt strained, I assumed I wasn't trying hard enough. This mindset is common in performance-driven cultures. Psychology calls it internalized achievement pressure. It turns normal human limits into moral shortcomings. Understanding dissolved that illusion. The first layer of understanding came through learning how stress actually works. Chronic stress doesn't motivate. It impairs. When cortisol stays elevated, the brain's threat system dominates. Empathy decreases. Patience shrinks. Memory falters. Realizing this reframed my struggles. I wasn't weak. My nervous system was overloaded. That distinction changed how I spoke to myself. This new understanding softened my relationship with my partner. Instead of interpreting emotional distance as rejection, I saw it as self-protection. When one nervous system is overwhelmed, connection feels unsafe. Attachment theory explains this clearly. Withdrawal isn't a lack of love, it's a response to perceived threat. Once I understood that, my reactions changed. I approached with curiosity instead of accusation. Understanding also helped us navigate cultural differences within our marriage. Living in the U.S. brought contrasting expectations around independence, emotional expression, and work identity. What once felt like incompatibility revealed itself as conditioning. Sociological research shows that cultural frameworks shape emotional habits. Seeing those patterns allowed compassion to replace blame. I also began to understand rest differently. Not as time off, but as time for integration. The brain needs pauses to process experiences. Without them, emotions accumulate unresolved. This explains why constant activity often leads to emotional numbness. Understanding this made rest purposeful rather than passive. At work, understanding reduced fear. I stopped equating worth with constant visibility. Performance psychology shows that sustainable contribution comes from rhythm, not intensity. When I trusted that, my confidence stabilized. I stopped overcompensating. That calm translated into better decisions. There was a moment that crystallized everything. During a disagreement, instead of defending my point, I said, "I think we're both tired." That sentence shifted the entire conversation. It acknowledged the real issue without assigning fault. Understanding created a shared language. Language shapes experience. Once we named the true problem, we stopped fighting each other. Understanding also redefined love. Love stopped being about endurance and became about attunement. I learned that staying connected requires recognizing when to lean in and when to give space. Emotional intelligence research confirms this. Responsiveness, not intensity, predicts relationship satisfaction. Understanding taught me when to respond and when to rest. The most healing realization was that growth doesn't require constant discomfort. Growth requires awareness. Awareness grows in calm environments. When the nervous system feels safe, insight emerges naturally. Forcing change under stress only deepens resistance. Understanding also changed how I viewed the American hustle narrative. Hustle isn't inherently harmful. But without understanding, it becomes self-erasure. When effort ignores limits, it turns destructive. Understanding restored balance. I learned to work with my biology, not against it. As understanding deepened, forgiveness followed. I forgave myself for seasons of burnout. I forgave my partner for moments of withdrawal. Forgiveness wasn't a decision. It was a byproduct of comprehension. When you understand why something happened, resentment loses its grip. This shift didn't remove challenges. Life remained complex. Work pressures persisted. Cultural differences still surfaced. But the emotional charge changed. Challenges became navigable instead of overwhelming. Understanding gave us a map. What I discovered is simple but profound. Understanding heals because it removes shame. Shame thrives in confusion. Clarity dissolves it. When you understand yourself, you stop fighting your own humanity. Choosing mental health over hustle wasn't a sacrifice. It was an alignment. Understanding made that visible. Rest strengthened that alignment. Together, they transformed my marriage, my work, and my sense of self. Understanding didn't fix everything. It made everything workable. And sometimes, that's the most powerful kind of healing there is. Choosing rest was choosing life. The ending of this story isn't dramatic. No sudden transformation. No viral moment. Just a quiet realization that changed how I live every ordinary day. Choosing rest wasn't quitting. It was choosing life as something to experience, not something to survive. That choice reshaped my mental health, my marriage, and my future in ways hustle never could. Living and working in the United States taught me many things about opportunity, freedom, and ambition. It also taught me how easily life becomes transactional. Time for money. Energy for validation. Presence for progress. Somewhere along the way, I forgot that life isn't a resume. It's a nervous system. And that system can only thrive when it feels safe. The final shift came when rest stopped being a strategy and became a value. I wasn't resting to perform better later. I was resting because I deserved to feel human now. Research in positive psychology supports this shift. Well-being increases when actions align with values rather than outcomes. Rest aligned me with care instead of constant evaluation. My marriage reflected that alignment. We stopped asking, what should we fix next, and started asking, what feels supportive right now. That subtle change reduced pressure. Pressure is the enemy of intimacy. Safety is its foundation. With safety, affection returned naturally. Laughter felt lighter. Conflict felt manageable. We also learned to respect each other's rhythms. Not every day needed resolution. Not every silence needed filling. Emotional regulation studies show that tolerance for ambiguity increases relational stability. Rest expanded that tolerance. We became less reactive and more responsive. The American environment remained fast-paced. Deadlines didn't disappear. Responsibilities didn't vanish. But my relationship with them changed. I no longer measured my worth by exhaustion. I measured it by clarity, consistency, and connection. That recalibration protected my mental health more than any productivity hack ever did. Choosing rest also changed how I approached the future. Instead of planning 5 years ahead obsessively, I focused on building sustainable weeks. Weeks that included recovery. Weeks that honored emotional needs. Sustainability isn't passive. It's intentional. Burnout research consistently shows that recovery predicts long-term success better than intensity. One of the most meaningful changes was how I handled identity. I stopped defining myself solely by what I produce. Identity psychology warns against role over-identification. When work becomes identity, loss becomes devastating. Rest diversified my sense of self. I became more than my output. That stability carried me through uncertainty. Climate, culture, and policy differences in the U.S. still shaped my life. But they no longer dictated my internal state. I adapted without abandoning myself. Adaptation rooted in self-respect feels different. It's flexible without being self-erasing. There were moments of doubt. Choosing rest felt countercultural. But over time, the evidence spoke louder than fear. My health improved. My patience deepened. My marriage strengthened. My work became more focused. These weren't coincidences. They were consequences of care. The happiest realization was this: rest didn't shrink my life. It expanded it. When I stopped rushing, I noticed more. Small joys. Subtle connections. Quiet gratitude. Mindfulness research shows that present moment awareness increases life satisfaction. Rest created space for that awareness to exist. This journey wasn't about rejecting ambition. It was about redefining strength. Strength became listening to my body. Strength became setting boundaries. Strength became choosing understanding over self-judgment. Understanding heals because it allows growth without violence. If you're watching this while feeling exhausted, overwhelmed, or quietly questioning the pace of your life, know this: you don't need to earn rest. You don't need permission to slow down. Rest isn't the reward at the end of the journey. It's the ground you walk on. Choosing mental health over hustle didn't make me less capable. It made me more alive. What if rest is strength? For me, it became the truest form of it. And that's where this story rests, not in perfection, but in peace hard-won through understanding. If this story touched something quiet inside you, the part that's tired of chasing, tired of proving, tired of surviving, then pause here for a moment. This wasn't just a story about choosing rest over hustle. It was a reminder that mental health is not a luxury, and healing doesn't mean giving up on life. It means finally listening to it. Living and working in the United States taught me ambition. But choosing mental health taught me wisdom. Understanding didn't make me weaker, it made me whole. And maybe, deep down, you already know this too. If you're navigating stress, marriage challenges, cultural pressure, burnout, or emotional exhaustion, you're not alone. This channel exists for people like you, people who want to grow without breaking, who want success without losing themselves, and who believe that rest can be strength. More real stories are coming. More honest conversations. More healing journeys about life, love, marriage, mental health, and personal growth in the U.S., told slowly, thoughtfully, and truthfully. Subscribe to this channel if you want stories that understand you. Like this video if it helped you breathe a little easier. Comment below, what part of your life needs rest right now? Because understanding heals. And sometimes, choosing yourself is the most powerful success of all. See you in the next story.